Welcome, everybody, to our Fireside chat featuring Garth Gahan, the CTO of Sonatafy Technology, and myself, Steve Teplin, CEO of Sonatafy Technology. We have over 208 people registered for this. Thank you guys so much. We're excited. We're always talking about software engineering, how to get the most out of your teams, how to use the best and greatest tools out there. And so this event is the DNA of high performing engineering teams. And Garth Gahan has actually been a three-time client of Sonatafy Technology over the past 4 years, brought us into three different organizations, led hundreds of engineers from our company. Garth joined our company as our chief technology officer over a month ago now. Garth, welcome.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Steve. I brought Sonatafy into multiple different companies and engineering teams that I led, and it was always really a great experience. And so I really wanted to come join the team here and help other companies have that same great experience. I remember the first time I was looking for a nearshore vendor. It was always a little bit. Nerve wracking. Is this going to be a good vendor? Are the engineers I'm going to get good? All these questions that we ask ourselves. And I was really blown away both by Steve in the beginning and then the engineers that we got. And so I did that then at each subsequent company and engineering team that I led. And so I'm really excited about being able to help other engineering leaders and do the same thing and bring these great engineers into their teams and help them get more done. And so super
And
excited to join Sonatafy and help others.
Garth, I have to laugh. When we first met, it was during COVID. You had a long COVID beard. I actually
Yeah,
didn't realize you were like 6'5", such a big dude.
yeah,
And but you're a big teddy bear, a big smart teddy bear, I should
yeah. I appreciate that. Yeah, I had
say.
that big long coat. I still have my driver's license from that time, and my boss at one of the companies finally one day said, "Hey, maybe it's time you trim that beard a little bit." So I got rid of it, but yeah, it
Well,
was fun while it lasted.
hey, well, let's jump right into topic here, Garth. And out there we see teams struggling all the time, whether it's small engineering teams that have two, three, four engineers, or very large ones with hundreds and hundreds of engineers. And sometimes there's this fallacy that all you need is one rock star leader and everything else will fall into place. And so let's jump into that and share your experience in that area.
Yeah, so I think you know um, something that we used to hear a lot more about, and it's kind of been debunked, but to a certain degree, people still are searching for it. Is that 10x engineer that can just get a ton more done, right? And if you're
The golden
a com-
unicorn engineer, right?
right, and definitely some engineers can get more done than others, and but especially nowadays with tools like Cursor and Windsurf and even Copilot and VS Code, you can get most engineers can get a ton done really fast. So it's not really anymore about finding that really one great engineer. Like engineers have to be that using the tools and stuff that they have. But I think of it more, when you're building your team, more like building a soccer team. And Malcolm Gladwell wrote about this in one of his books about, different sports teams can be built differently to win, right? And when you're building like a basketball team, if you just go and get LeBron James or a one big superstar, you can become really successful, right? But a soccer
Well,
team,
unfortunately, here in Phoenix, where we are, that hasn't worked for the Phoenix Suns.
I mean,
So,
they're a lot more successful than they used to be. But yeah,
all right, that's
so
fair.
I think but with a soccer team, it's really much more important. It's that the you're only as good as the lowest person on your team, right? And so that it's better to get a bunch of above average people and have them work really well together, and that's how you get the most, right? You can't just put Messi on your team and expect to win championships. It doesn't work that way in soccer, right? And I think engineering teams are a lot more like soccer than they are like basketball.
So,
Um,
Garth, would you say 5 years ago that was the case, or do you think, fast forward as we have a lot of great AI tools and things to help, do you think that's changed in the current environment?
I do think it's changed, but I think 5 years ago that wasn't the case either. But I think with the tools that we have now, it has made it even more true, right? It's even more like a soccer team now versus before. Maybe it was somewhere in the middle, and that one engineer could do so much more that they were worth that extra. But now it's even more true that you're like a soccer team. So it's really, um, yeah. So building that great team is how you want to get the most done. When you're talking from a business point of view, the things that that really matter is can we deliver quickly, and can we deliver on time? Like, can we plan for when things are going to get done? And that's what matters most to most businesses that have engineering teams. And so
So,
so
talk
having a
about
great
talk
team
about
allows you to do that.
yeah, talk about some strategies here, Garth. Of so the team, the talented team is better than the individual. 10x unicorn engineer. Talk about some strategies on how you've seen successful developing that and making that work.
Yeah, so I think the number one most important thing that I want to talk to, and this is true for any team, whether it's basketball or soccer or whatever, but if you look at any successful team, whether it's sports or any other kind of team, when we it's about culture, right? And when I talk about culture, I really mean we're talking about outcomes, right? Like, what are the outcomes of the team? That's how you measure a culture, not how happy people are. That's not how what I think of with culture. And if you have great outcomes, people are going to be happy. People want to be part of a winner, right? So, when again, going back to sports a little bit, I think when you, whether it's ESPN or some news source, right? When they talk, oh, this team has a great culture, they always talk about that about the teams that win. They never talk about that with the teams that lose, right? They never
That's
go,
true.
oh, well, this team wasn't good this year, but they have a great culture. That's not the way it works. People only care about the culture if you're winning. And and so the number one, if you look through the teams that are really dominant, right? And just looking at college for a second, we could talk about like Nick Saban teams in football or Patty Gasso teams in softball, who she's won more championships than anyone, and she's done it really consistently, right? And people like that, or John Wooden in basketball. The number one most important thing that all of these people have in common, they all have different philosophies and stuff, but the thing that they all have in common is they have really high expectations, right? They have high expectations for the people, and not just about the outcomes, right? Having high expectations. Patty Gasso, being a softball coach, having high expectations, like saying, "Oh, you better get lots of hits and homer." That's not a good high expectation. But she has really high expectations for how everybody comes to practice every day, how hard they work, right? And then the outcomes, right? The how many home runs and hits and all that stuff isn't just happens, right? But all the things that people do every day, and how that translates to engineering would be probably something like, are we every single a review that you put up, did you make it really easy for your reviewer, right? Did you follow a really good process for to make it easy to review? Because if it's easy to review, and then as your reviewer, did you do all the steps to review that code really well, right? And so are you doing all those things really well? Then, so if you just say, oh, I want the expectation of having high quality code, that doesn't work. Instead, you have to have the expectation that all of these things are going to be done consistently all the time. And then you get good quality code. That's just the output that you get. Right. So that's an example.
So
of
Garth,
yeah.
to that analogy, then you're only as good as your coach that is, outlining the things you need to do to be successful. Just like from a sports perspective of showing up on time, practicing hard,
Yeah.
supporting
So
your
I think
teammates.
I think there's some element of truth to that, but I think the real magic with these kind of coaches is there's let's use Nick Saban for a second, right? There's 100 plus players, I don't know how many, on a college football team. Nick Saban can't watch everyone and make sure everyone's uh, doing an extra rep on bench press or finishing every sprint 100%, and right, he can't do that. So what he has to do is create a culture where all of the players hold each other accountable for having that really high um, accountability. So in engineering, if I'm a reviewer and somebody puts up, assigns me a review, and they didn't do the things that make it easy for me. They don't have good testing steps. It's not small. It's a giant amount of code that they want me to review. All the things that we all know are necessary to do a good code review, and they didn't make that easy for me. Then I have two choices. I can do a not so good code review, or I can go back to that person and say, "Hey, this is not the standard, right? What we need to do here is what we do here at this company is we make this easy for the reviewer. So you need to go redo this. You need to go put up this request again, break it up, make good testing steps for me, do all the things that you're supposed to do to make this review easy on me, and then I'll give you a great review, and we can deliver well, right? So all the people, all the individual engineers need to be holding each other accountable. So a great leader it's about setting that standard and then making it so that the engineers can hold each other accountable to that standard and making
So
them so
as
they
as
want to
the
do that.
leader of an engineering team, Garth, are you setting what that standard should be, or the guidelines that the team should be meeting based on things like the reviews, as you mentioned?
Yeah, so I think in the beginning, yes. In the beginning, you're saying this is the minimum standard that we have to do, right? We want to do these things, but what you're really doing is you are setting people up to say, "Hey, this is what we want to accomplish. We want to have super great quality code. We want to make everything really readable. We want to be able to, you want to set goals for the team that they really buy into, right? We've all worked at engineering companies where we get tons of bugs every day, and when we do get bugs, they're really hard to figure out because the code base is kind of hard to work in, and these kind of things. So if you set with the team like, hey, that's not the company I want to work at. I want to work at a company where we don't get tons of bugs, so we can work on cool products all the time instead. And when there is a bug, I want it to be super, even if it's somebody else's code, I want to be able to figure it out really quickly and go and fix that bug and go back to work. Like that is, if you get everyone to buy into that, now they're going to be setting that standard higher and higher all the time. So they're going to be coming up with things on their own to be improving that, right?
All right.
So
So, Garth, let
yeah.
me pause you for a second and thank you, everyone. We're getting bombarded with questions and comments here, which is fantastic. Please keep doing that. And we'll do our best to answer all of them. But let me throw up a comment here that came from an anonymous LinkedIn user relative to this topic. So, who is doing the code reviews? Is it leaders, senior devs, tech leads? Is it the QA team? Is it everybody? What are your
I
thoughts
mean,
on that?
this is company dependent. I But for the most part, I think I would say this in a different way. It's not about role. What I would say is the peer should be doing it, right? So the appropriate person should be doing it. Maybe it's the QA person. Maybe QA person should be doing QA. But in my last company that I worked at, our QA person was really good, And they did do code reviews, especially when the code review was something around, or when the PR was something around, um, deployments or something like that. Like then I would definitely have that person review, right? But one of the things that's really important here, we can, this is kind of a little out of the scope of what we're talking about, but one of the things I like to do is have good architecture meetings before I start coding, and have all the engineers do that. And then, so the people that are in that architecture meeting should be the people reviewing it. And that makes for better reviews as well. But it's not about, I really don't think like reviews should be only done by leadership or anything like that. I think everyone needs to hold each other accountable. So, sometimes you don't necessarily want juniors doing all the reviews. That's can lead to problems because there's a knowledge
Yeah.
gap there, right? But it should be done by peers. So it's very dependent on both the company and the specific code you're putting up.
Well, let me ask you then. So, fostering this collaborative culture, who do you have? When you have your engineering teams, who's part of planning and architecture and reviews? What have you seen the best way to foster good collaborative cultures, and who do you include in what?
Yeah, so this is a good question. I think that there is, in order to create a collaborative culture, before we talk about who's in what meeting, et cetera, the most important thing is that people have to feel safe. It has to be a safe space. And I know that some people hear that safe space and they feel like, oh, this is right. But that's not what I mean. What I mean is, um, people have to feel like if they say something that everybody views as maybe that's a stupid thing to say or whatever, like that's okay, right? Like I've been in plenty of architecture meetings 10, 15 years into my career where everyone was like, oh no, that's not a good idea, right? Like, and if people don't have the ability to both safely say bad ideas and good ideas, then people won't have that, right? So there has to be an enormous amount of trust that everybody has a great amount of respect for each other, right? So that starts with the leadership, uh, you know, uh, the engineering leader getting trust from everyone on the team, and then using that to get trust. That everyone on the team trusts each other, right? So there's a lot that goes into that. We can talk about that. To
Garth,
answer your question,
I,
yeah, go
I
ahead.
hear a lot from engineers that, and engineers are very smart, brilliant people. And I hear a lot from engineers that they do sometimes get afraid, intimidated with all the smart people on a call, that a question they're going to ask is going to be stupid.
Hmm.
And I know we're always coaching engineers through that it's better to ask and even have it be a dumb question than not ask and not be able to get your deliverable done.
Yeah, so I think to the point that I just made, um, you know, you really have to. You can't tell people it's okay. You have to show them, and the number
Mhm.
one way to show them, um, I think imagine we take a bunch of engineers to a wedding and there's a dance floor. We're not going to get a lot of dancing at that wedding. So if you want everybody to go out there and make themselves
Is
vulnerable
that
and
a
dance,
stereotype? Engineers can't dance?
not that they can't dance, they're not going to be like I'm stereotyping, yeah, but it's a good metaphor. Everyone will understand, and it's not a sports metaphor. I don't want to make it all sports metaphors. So not everybody's going to go out on that dance floor. So if nobody's going on that dance floor, it's your job as a leader, no matter how much you don't want to do it, it's your job as a leader to be the first one to go out on the dance floor and make a fool of yourself, right? And if you're really smart, what I would do if I was in that situation is I would look over to one of the engineers that I have a lot of trust with, and a lot of, there's some people you're going to have maybe know a little bit longer or whatever. I would tell that person, like, hey, I'm going to go out on the dance floor and I'm going to dance and make a fool of myself. And I really need you to do me a favor. And after I've been out there for a couple of minutes, come out there with me, right? And it's really hard for that person to say no. They know you're doing it. And now if that person, and if they say no, they say no, you go do that with someone else, right? But now you're going to go out there and make a fool of yourself. You're going to get that person to make a fool of themselves, but you two are going to be out there having fun. Now you're making it okay for everyone else to go out there and make a fool of themselves. So what you need to do is in those architecture meetings, you need to show that, oh, I can make a fool of myself. Number one. Okay, so that's the number one tactic you can do. The second tactic, this is even more important, is when somebody does do something, maybe makes a bad suggestion or something, you stop the meeting and you really thank them for it. Right. So you want to promote that activity. Say, hey, you know what? We're not going to do that, but I really, really appreciate you bringing that up. And you make, because so my mom's a therapist, and one of the things she tells me is people don't remember what you said to them. They remember how you made them feel. Right.
Yep.
So what they're going to remember from that is I brought something up, and even though we didn't do it, I felt good about it. So if somebody takes that risk, you need to reward them for it. You can't just be, oh, we're not going to do that, move on. If you do
Yep.
that person's gonna be like, oh, in their head they're gonna be like, oh, I said something stupid. Everybody thinks I'm an idiot. Everybody here is a better engineer than me. I'm not good enough to be here. Like, imposter syndrome is super real, and so it's your job as a leader to be like, oh, this is not how I need to reinforce this behavior.
So how have you in fostering great teams? And I love the analogy of a bunch of engineers at a wedding and a dance floor.
Oh, that's good,
So
because I just came up with it off the top of my head. So
I figured you planned that one. I liked it,
yeah.
and because you can picture it. And so, how have you been successful at developing the leaders on engineering teams to set the tone? Because what everything you were just talking about was, the leader setting the tone of getting on the dance floor, the leader setting the tone of pausing, thinking for an idea that might not have been a good idea, but making them feel good. So how have you made that contagious in your engineering teams?
Yeah, so I think the when you're building your culture, and that's what we're really talking about here, right? Is you have three tools. Um, and I didn't make this up. I'm stealing this, right? But it's you have practice, promote, and permit. And so that practice is what you do every day as a leader. You can't demand excellence out of everyone else if they don't think you're excellent. And I don't mean you are excellent. I mean they have to think you're excellent, right? So if they're not, so you have to promote that excellence by showing everyone how excellent you are, and not just, and I don't mean, and a lot of people try this by showing everybody how great of an engineer they are. And I can tell you, almost every engineering team I've been on, I have been one of the weakest actual engineers. I'm not a bad engineer, but like I always try and hire people smarter than me. I think that's always the key to success. And if you do that, then you're going to get some really good engineers on your team. And I've worked with some people that are, from an engineering standpoint, are much better than me. So when I go, so sorry, I got sidetracked. So they have to, it's not just that they think I'm a good engineer, it's that they really believe that I'm trying my hardest every day to meet our goals. Those goals that I talked about earlier of having good quality code base, all that kind of stuff, right? So then if they believe that, then I can promote the activities. And a good example of that is what I just gave, right? Someone said something kind of silly or whatever, maybe not a good suggestion, but I still promoted that activity. And then the other, I didn't say
You
it.
had such a good quote, Garth. I had to throw
Yeah,
it
it is
up
a good
there.
quote, but it's definitely not my quote. So, but anyway,
You know what? On this fireside chat, Garth, this is your quote.
okay,
It's not
fair.
what you say to people
And
that they
then the
remember. It's
other
how
thing we can
you.
talk about, but super super important for building a good culture of high expectations is permit, right? So the example I gave earlier permit is if somebody puts up a PR for me to review, and that PR isn't really good enough for me to review, I don't just do it. I tell them, no, you need to get it right before I do it. And people, then it becomes a waste of time for them to do it wrong in the future, right? So a simpler example of that, just to be clear about that, is if people are showing up late to meetings, you call them out on it. You don't just say, oh no, right? You don't just pull. You're like, no, we don't show up late to meetings. Okay, so, or I say first, I'm going to promote. We show up on time to meetings all the time, and then when they don't show up to meetings on time, you tell them every time, no, you need to show up to meetings. And so that's like and maybe showing up on time to meetings isn't super important in your company, but I'm just giving that as an example of how you use the permit.
Having dealt with hundreds and hundreds of CTOs, CIOs, engineering leaders, I think that is the number one frustration point that I hear over and over is
Well, in my experience as an
engineers get
engineer,
in their zone,
the
they have their
CTOs are
headphones
usually the
on.
one that's late to the meeting. But yeah, all right.
Well, not the good ones.
All right. Cool. So yeah, using that practice, promote, permit framework is the key. Teaching leaders how to do that. But also when you're picking your leader, you need to pick someone that is not the best engineer, but is someone who uh, has a large amount of empathy for other people and can really um, has that practice part down, right?
Gotcha. Gotcha. So let's jump into the next section here, Garth, and let's talk about the importance of high expectations.
Yeah, so we talked about this a little bit. I think that the most important thing here is having high everybody knows this already, right? Like have high expectations for your team. Cool. um so I used to coach my daughter's softball team, and you can always tell the good coaches from the bad coaches really quickly. And the way you could on the other team, I mean, because the bad coaches do this, they say, all right, let's get it, go hit the ball, right? Like that, how is that helping anyone, right? Like they know they're supposed to hit the ball. But if you're telling them, during practice and, as they're warming up, etc., this is what you need to do, right? You need to, and I don't want to go through a swing, but right, the things that they need to do while they're swinging, and more importantly, like you have to practice that 1,000 times so you can do that when you're actually up to bat, right? So these types of things it's about, are you promoting, do you have a high expectations for the inputs to get the outputs you want, or are you just expecting them to do those things automatically? You can't expect, because everybody on the team has to have those same expectations. So if you're just saying we want to have high quality code, I expect the team to do that. Well, that's not how you get there. You get there by expecting people to. So professionalism is maybe, because maybe not everyone on this call is an engineer. So let's say you need your team to just act a little bit more professional, because they're mostly just graduating from college, right? So, okay, how do we act professional? We show up on time to meetings. We, communicate well when we're talking, especially to non-engineering people. We need to communicate in languages they can speak, and things like that, right? So we tell them how to act professionally, right? When we meet someone, we shake their hand and look them in the eye, right? Like all these things about professionalism that are super important are, and I'm using that analogy because the things that go into professionalism is what you need to teach if you want someone to act professional. If you just say, I need you to act professional, like that's not really helping the person if they don't have those skills, right? If I wanted someone to, let's say I have a manager and maybe I need them to be a little bit more charismatic, that I can't tell them, hey, I need you to be more charismatic. That doesn't help them, right? Like what are they supposed to do with that information? But I can tell them, hey, you know what, you can maybe smile a little bit more if you can. And I know that's kind of hard sometimes. That's super hard for me sometimes.
I've
Steve's
never
laughing
said
too hard
that
at
to you,
that.
Garth.
Yeah, I know. You never, yeah. So I think but just making yourself vulnerable is the most important thing. So talk to them about how to make themselves vulnerable, right? Is really important for charisma and things like this. So giving them the skills to be more charismatic instead of just telling them be more charismatic. And so it's about having a high expectation for what they put into the outputs that I want as the leader, not just high expectations for the outputs. We all have high expectations for the outputs. How do you get there is the important thing.
So, Garth, you have been an engineering executive in a lot of different roles. Sometimes you've been able to build the team, sometimes you're taking over existing teams. How do you implement these type of approaches with the balance of a team you inherited, as well as the pressure you're getting from whether it's the CEO or the COO or the CFO of having to see improvement, having to see in ways that they can understand. How do you weigh all those things when implementing this?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that's really important here is, as a leader, whether you're talking to yourself or you're talking to someone else, you can never blame the team. If you took that job to be an engineering manager or a director or a VP or whatever, like, if your team is not performing, that's not the team's fault. That's your fault, right?
Yep.
You don't say like that. That's just, if somebody tells me, oh, the problem is that this engineer is messing up and that's why I can't do my job. Well, that's not the engineer's fault. That's your fault, right? And so, and the minute I hear someone say that, I know, like, oh, this is a weak sauce person, right? Like, so, and don't get me wrong, I've had to fire engineers for not performing, but I never went to anybody else and said, hey, this engineer isn't doing their job and that's why I'm not doing good, right? Like, that's not the way it works. So that's number one. So you're responsible for the output. You're not responsible for telling someone else what the, like, otherwise what purpose do you serve? So sorry, I got distracted. Oh, so the question is, how do I manage the balance? It's very different. If you're building a team from the beginning, it's a lot easier, right? You probably have people that you've worked with in the past that maybe already know a lot of the things you've taught, right? So the last company I worked at, I was the first engineer. I wrote, a lot of the first code myself, and then I hired people that had worked with me before, and so they were kind of already bought into my leadership style and all that kind of stuff. So it's really easy. And I was able to ramp that team up really fast and build awesome things really fast. But I also went to companies that will remain nameless that had kind of really toxic. That's unfair. They just didn't have a good culture, right? People weren't working together really well. They were, it was like felt more like a competition between engineers than a collaborative environment. All these kind of things. We've all been in environments like that. And so, in order to get over that, the first thing you need to do as a leader, whether building a team from beginning or when you walk in, is you need to figure out what is the goals for this team, right? And what is the company goal, right? Because your job is to deliver on company goals. And what is the goals that these engineers can align behind to reach this company goal? So an example of that is the last team I built. It was a health tech company. It was a mental health company, and so one of the things that was really important, it was also a startup. So we had to build fast, but we also had to build reliable software because our customers were people that, they weren't usually early adopter type of ICP. And then also, if someone goes to do therapy, like, that person's probably in a really, may have a lot of anxiety, maybe even be thinking about self-harm. Like, I don't want that person to have any problem getting on to see their therapist, right? So I want to build really reliable software. So with these goals in mind, of building fast but reliable software, I needed to tell the engineers about that goal, and then what are the things that we might call them KPIs, but really they're goals of that the engineers need to do to deliver on that goal and get them to buy into that, right? And if they're not, so that's the number one thing. If people aren't buying into your goals, then you need to become a better salesman as a leader. You have to get people to buy into what you're doing. If you're just saying, oh, here's a ticket, here's a ticket, here's a ticket, here's a ticket. Well, number one, I think we're going to be way past that soon with going back to what we were talking about AI, right? Engineers are going to be more like product engineers. But I think it's really about, you have to sell them on, this is the dream. This is what almost every engineering team, one of the things I talked about a lot was, we want to be the best engineering team in the world. And were we? Probably not. You can't really measure that, right? But I can tell you, almost every single place that I worked and led for a while, everybody would tell me, hey, I really love working here and we're doing awesome things. right? So to me, that's the best engineering team I can build. And if but they're not aligning behind, oh, we have Fridays off, or we have whatever, right? We have, and don't get me wrong, really good benefits is important for health, happiness at work, but they were really bought into the goal of creating something awesome, not just an awesome product, but an awesome team.
So the right leadership, setting the right goals together, teaching them how to meet those goals. How do you get the team to maintain these high expectations without burnout?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I think the part of it is what I was just talking about, right? If everybody has bought into that, um, so I'm a big Ohio State fan, and one of my favorite coaches is Jim Tressel. A lot of my theories about leadership and stuff come from him. And one of the things he always said is when he was recruiting players, he only wanted to recruit players that really wanted to be there, right? So if I'm selling that dream of building a great, team, and building a great, engineering, not just great team, but we want to build a great process, and all these things, um, then if somebody is just someone that doesn't really want to be there, they're not really bought into that, they're not really buying that whole thing, right? It's up to me to sell it to them. But if everybody else is buying, not everybody's going to sell, right? You can ask any salesman there, nobody has 1,000% close rate. Some people are just maybe going to be a little bit too skeptical, or maybe some people are just, they don't really like the mission of the company, depending on the company, all this kind of stuff, right? You need to maybe help that person find another position or something like that, because but anyway, so that's a big part of it, right? Get people to buy into what you're doing. I think the other thing is, um my experience has been, I actually have not, once people are really bought in, it's been my experience that I have to get people to not work as hard, right? They will burn themselves out. It's not for me pushing them. It's actually my job is to constantly be like, hey, I noticed that you put up like 3 PRs over the weekend. Like, did you spend any time with your family? Like, what are we doing? Because what I had to constantly educate people and about, hey, if I get you for 40 hours a week of really good work, that's enough. But if you're working every day, those 40 hours that you're supposed to be working, you're not really going to be working as well as you can, right? And maybe that's sometimes 50 hours because we have a crisis or we're at a deadline or something like that. But kind of what I'm saying is, I would rather have a really good engineer that works really hard for 40 hours a week, and really I can get the most out of that person for 40 hours. They're not spending time on social media during that time, et cetera, right? Versus someone that's like, oh yeah, I did all this work today, and I worked 7 days a week, but really that person has to be, no one can do that. They have to distract themselves a lot and do lots of stuff, and right. So what I really want is someone that is, so I had to educate you have to educate the engineers a lot on, there's only so much time you can spend coding, only so much time you can spend uh using your brain this way, and rest is super important, right? No matter what it is, um, the elite of whatever, um, they rest is super important, right? If you're an elite athlete, you work out a couple hours a day and you spend a lot of time resting, right? I met someone the other day. He's 23. He's in the Phoenix Symphony. I actually didn't meet him. I actually met his mom. She was sitting next to me, but we were at the symphony, and she was talking about his schedule. He wakes up in the morning, he practices for like 4 hours, and then he goes and plays pickleball and does other things, right? Because he's got to do those other things as well. You would think at 23, like he's got a long career, he'd just be practicing all day, every day. But if he did that, he probably wouldn't actually get as good results. He probably wouldn't get as much out of that time. So rest is super important.
So Garth, when I look at the past 5.5 years of the software engineering world, it's been quite a whirlwind with
Mm-hmm.
COVID hitting, with the huge spike in demand for developers, then companies pulling back based on the economy. And the constant thing I hear right now is nobody has the patience for anything but the best high performing engineers. And, with tools like AI and things that we've discussed, engineers can get there, but it puts a lot of pressure on them. How do you coach engineers through this?
Yeah, so I think one is, that's not new, right? Every company I've worked at since I started coding, the CEO never says, "Hey, can the engineers just deliver a little less?" Like that's not the way it works, right? So there's always people wanting more from you, right? That's never going to change. And whether this isn't just an engineering thing, whether you are a engineer or you're an entrepreneur or you're a therapist or whatever it is, the most you have to manage your time, right? So one of the things I talk about a lot is you're a software engineer, you're a professional, I'm going to treat you like a professional, you need to manage your time. And that one of the most important skill in managing your time is being able to say no. You have to be able to say no. These are the things that are important. This is the single most important thing I need to do. So I'm going to say no to pretty much everything else. But there's going to be a lot of people that ask for things, right? And a lot of that is, well, if especially everybody has Slack now, people can just Slack an engineer and be like, "Oh, I want this. Can you do this for me real quick?" And could the engineer do it? Probably, but that's not the most important thing they should be doing. And sometimes that rubs people in the business the wrong way, etc. But engineers are expensive and their time is valuable, and giving them the ability to say no and then backing them up when they do is super important. And then so learning how to say no is super important and often hard for engineers, because a lot of times engineers are you know maybe a little bit more introverted, and standing up to people, especially maybe C-suite people or VPs or whatever, is a new skill to learn.
Gotcha. And
But
this
if
is
they
where,
believe that their leader is always going to back them up, they'll have a lot more confidence. So that's super important as the leader.
excellent. And so let's, as this has been a great discussion, let's talk about trust and how we make sure to make that contagious throughout the organization, and how you've been effective at doing that.
Yeah. So I think this is for everybody talks about, oh, we want to have trust on the team, et cetera, right? Um, but you cannot hold people to high expectations unless there's a ton of trust on the team. And this is a quote. Again, this isn't my quote, but this is one of my favorite quotes. And it's, you cannot push someone more than they trust you, right? So if I want to hold someone to a high standard, that person has to trust that I am looking out for their best interest. If I'm gonna, and what the best compliment I ever got, and I don't even think he knows this, was the last manager that worked for me. He might be on this call. He did RSVP, so but he'll know after this. But I think he told me, hey, you know what? We were going to work on that project, and you told me that we could get this done, and I didn't think we could, but I trusted that you. Everything I've always trusted that when you say we can do something, we can do it, right? So the thing is, if someone trusts that you have their best interests always in line, and not like you're just doing whatever the CEO or whatever C-level person is, you're not just pushing work on them to see how much you can get out of them, but you are working with them and you're working what's best for the engineers. Then when you push them, you can get more out of someone than they know what's possible, right? When they think this is what they're doing, this is what they know they can do, and this is what they actually can do. And to get this, they have to trust you a lot. And building that trust is super important. And the number one thing you need to do to build that trust is day one, when you walk into that team and it's a bunch of people you don't know, you just have to give them your trust. You can't make people earn your trust and expect them to trust you. That doesn't work that way. The fastest way to earn someone's trust is to trust them. And I've had a lot of people that, were my leadership, but they were, people that were my bosses, etc. And, they would tell me things like, I trust, but I verify. And it's like, well, that's not really trust. That's just like managing me. Right. And, trust and verify is, and you'll see that repeated by people that are leadership experts all the time. And trust and verify is like important for things like, nuclear missile defense, right? Because you don't just want to trust that the Russians are going to do what they say, which is where that phrase comes from. But when you're dealing with your engineers who are on your team and everything, like, you actually want to trust them and you want to coach them. Part of trust, the most important part of trust in this situation anyway, is they need to trust that if they fail, that you're not going to you're going to hold them accountable, but you're not going to be mad at them, right? You're going to say, okay, well, we failed. What are we going to do? We're going to talk about it, and it's probably going to be an uncomfortable conversation, but you're not going to leave that conversation feeling like a failure. You're going to leave that conversation feeling hopeful that that's never going to happen again. In fact, you're going to leave that conversation feeling confident that that's never going to happen again, right?
Gotcha. So along
And
these lines,
yeah.
Garth, and we've gotten a lot of questions, and this question kind of really deals, when we sum up what you were saying, and you're brought in to lead a new engineering organization. It's a toxic culture. There's blame. There's finger pointing,
Mhm.
and what would be the steps you would do if you inherited a team like this?
Yeah. So, you know, the, you need to figure out where this came from, right? But I think the number one thing
Probably
that
toxic previous leadership.
maybe, yeah, but it could be that the person above that leader is making it really hard to build the culture they want, right? But the number one thing that I would do in this situation is uh, I would take personal accountability for everything bad that's going on, right? So all the engineers, everything that's being blamed on the engineers, because obviously they're getting blamed, otherwise they wouldn't be doing finger pointing, right? Something's going wrong, that's my fault, right? I'm the one that's going to get blamed. And I would make that really clear to the engineers. If anything goes wrong, we're going to blame me. When we're talking to other people, we're going to blame me. And then they have someone to finger point, and they finger point to that they feel comfortable finger pointing to, because they know when that person that they're talking to comes and asks me, I'm going to say, oh, yeah, the buck stops here. I'm accountable for that. And you are accountable for that on day one, right? Might not actually be your fault, but you're still accountable for it. Now you're accountable for fixing it, right? So now you're starting to build this trust with the engineer. So here's the thing: is if you walk into a culture like that, that's not a bad thing. That's actually a huge opportunity. It's so easy to earn people's trust that have been mistreated. If everything was great and you walk in, everyone's like, everything was great before you got here, they're not going to like you that much in the beginning because they're scared that you're going to change things. If everything sucks, everybody's super hopeful that you can fix things. So you got this hope thing on your side, and you have like 3 days to nurture that. If you come in and the first thing you say is, hey, nothing's your fault from now on, just blame me if things go wrong, everyone's like, oh, who the fuck is this guy? Oh, sorry, am I not allowed to say that on this? Yeah.
Wait,
But
where's the belief? Careful.
yeah, so people are going to be very trusting of that guy, and then you need to back that up with action, and you need to go tell the other leaders, like, hey, if you have a problem, you need to come to me. You don't go to the engineers and complain to them, right? So you need to get rid of the blaming and finger pointing. If the blaming and finger pointing is happening internally, you need to talk to people about, hey, we're professionals. We need to trust each other. If you don't think someone is good enough, come talk to me about it. Don't come talk to them about it. If they didn't do something, well, we didn't hold them to the high. Then you have to start building trust. Then you have to start building the high standard, and that's a process that'll take a little bit of time. But as long as you're constantly building trust and you're taking accountability, it goes back to that thing, right? Practice, promote, permit. The first thing you need to do is show that you take accountability. Then you need to promote them taking accountability. And then when they don't take accountability, you need to not permit that, right? But if you're not doing it, they're not going to do it.
So let me throw another situation at you, Garth.
Yeah.
How do how have you had luck managing the C-suite? Let's say you're brought into an organization as the engineering leader, whether it's VP of engineering, whether it's CTO, and you're paid a bunch of money. You're told it's a mess. There's all this finger pointing. What would you tell the executive team that isn't involved in engineering, um, that you need from them for you to be successful?
Yeah. So I think the most important thing to build trust with the C suite is you need to speak their language, right? So you don't talk to them about bugs and don't talk to them about why something is broken with, your rescue workers. Like the minute you say things like that, unless you have a very technical CEO, which is different, but
Not all
um,
CEOs can be as perfect as me.
yeah,
I
and
get it, but
I've usually worked for tech-enabled companies, and the reality is most companies are tech-enabled companies, not actual tech companies, right? And so you need to talk to that person. Like, what is their actual pain? Are they worried about the ROI of the engineering team? Are they worried about the velocity? What is the thing that they're actually worried about? And give them little nuggets and figure out what the thing is that they're actually worried about, and talk to them about those things, and talk to them about, okay, this is my strategy with the team, and this is how I'm going to be able to show you, right? So you need to talk to them in their language. And then, same thing, you need to take accountability, right? If there's a bunch of blame, et cetera, happening on the team before you got there, I guarantee you that leader was probably doing that. They were saying, oh, the engineer this, the engineer that, right? And so,
uh,
or they were blaming another department, which happens really more likely, right? They're like, oh, well, the product team sucks, and that's why the engineering sucks, or whatever, right? This stakeholder sucks. You can like, no, I'm accountable for this. I'm going to fix this. This is how we fix that. And if this other department isn't good or not doing their job, you need to work extra hard. There's nothing you can do about it. You can't fire those people.
awesome. I mean, I think you've given very insightful and unique insight. We often don't hear CTOs and engineering leaders. They're usually talking more about just the metrics, just this. And your human first approach is easily a key reason why you've been so successful throughout your career. And it's been
Yeah,
a
I think
great.
the most important metric when I think about an engineering team are we delivering what we said we would, and are we delivering it on time? And if you can do that, that's what a business really wants. They want predictable results, and they want it done as fast as possible, right? But if you're promising it to go super fast, then you're not. Like that's worse than not, right? So it's kind of, yeah. So being predictable is super valuable to a company, and Steve, you can probably talk about that more than me, but having a reliable, predictable way to plan is super important for, especially if you're, have investors and stuff, because that CEO has to be like, oh, this is what we're going to deliver in the future. They don't really know what goes into doing all those things, but if they know they
Right.
have someone that can trust that can deliver those things, that's super important to that person.
Well, as we have to wrap up here, this has been a great discussion, and I hope. Thank you. I'm sorry for there was a lot of comments we weren't able to get to. You're welcome to chat with us anytime. Go on our website, book a meeting with us, um, have conversations about your engineering team, and we have kind of a unique thing offer we've been doing lately with new clients is, because of the DNA we've built into our engineers and how we vet them, how we train them, we're actually offering free trials with no strings attached for 90 days of senior engineers. And, Garth, you helped us architect this program based on the confidence level of our engineers, of what they're able to do. And, this program is really around, you get 3 months to try them out. If you like them, you pay for them and keep them. If you don't like them, no strings attached. You don't have to pay. And, that's how confident we are with our engineering team and how we're helping other companies. And, Garth, you were a big step in helping us, have this level of confidence to be able to make such an aggressive offer like this.
Yeah, I think the really thing for me is I remember, we talked about, I brought Sonatafy into 3 companies. The first company, I was definitely nervous. right? And if I had this guarantee, it would have been a lot easier for me to sell it to my CTO at the time, right? And I mean, I ended up selling it anyway, but going into the other companies, I had 100% confidence, right? Because I'd done it before and I had a vendor, but this just allows us to um, take some of that risk off for you when you're trying to find that company you want to work for. And because I know that the biggest part is often not actually the money. It's like, well, is this person going to meet the standards of my team, right? And I understand how important those high standards are, and a lot of that goes into hiring, which we didn't touch on this, and we probably should do in a future fireside chat. But we have really high standards for hiring, and that's going to matter a lot to our customers.
Well, Garth, thanks for jumping on this with me today, and it's been fun having you part of the company. And by the turnout we've had on this, clearly a lots of interest and many more of these discussions to come. Thank you, everyone, for sticking in, for listening. This is Steve Taplin and Garth Gallahan from Sonatafy Technology. Have a great day. Thanks, everyone.